My dog Beauregard hasn't growled at a stranger in 6 years. He's old, half-deaf, and the most forgiving soul I've ever known. So when I brought my son Owen to the porch last Thanksgiving, and Beauregard stood up, tucked his tail, and walked inside without looking back, I should have paid attention. Dogs know. They always know. I just wasn't listening yet. Let me back up. My name is Henry Beaumont. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, in an antebellum house on Trad Street that I bought in 1989, with money I earned sticking my arm inside horses and telling people their dogs needed surgery. I was a veterinarian for 44 years. Large animal, small animal, the occasional iguana that someone's teenager thought would be a good idea. I retired at 71, not because I couldn't do the work, but because my hands started to shake just enough that I didn't trust them with a scalpel anymore. A man who knows when to stop is a man who still has his dignity. Remember that. It becomes relevant. I am 76 years old. I take my coffee with 1 sugar because my late wife Margaret told me black coffee was just bitterness pretending to be strength, and she was right about most things. I have buried that woman, 2 Labrador retrievers, and more barn cats than I care to count. I do not frighten easily, I do not forgive lazily, and I do not, under any circumstances, enjoy being lied to. Beauregard is a 13-year-old basset hound, with ears like velvet curtains and a metabolism that suggests he is part Ottoman. He sleeps approximately 19 hours a day. He has not chased a squirrel since the Obama administration. He is, without exaggeration, the best judge of character I have ever met, and I once sat on a jury in Charleston County for 6 weeks. Beauregard knew something about my son that I had spent 39 years refusing to see, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My son, Owen Beaumont, is 39 years old and lives 12 minutes away in a 3-bedroom craftsman cottage in Mount Pleasant. A house I bought for him, incidentally, because his architecture firm had a slow year, which turned into a slow 3 years, which turned into me writing a check so my son wouldn't have to explain to his wife why they were renting again. Owen is tall, well-built, and has the kind of face that makes people nod along with whatever he's saying before they've actually processed any of it. He inherited his mother's cheekbones and absolutely none of her honesty. His wife, Jenna, is 35. She is a freelance journalist who writes long features about education reform and the Gullah Geechee corridor and other things that matter to people who still believe the world can be nudged in the right direction. She is smart and kind, and brings me she-crab soup on Sundays when she knows I've been alone too long. She is the only person in this story who did nothing wrong. She is also the only one who walked out of it standing taller than she went in. In mid-September, Owen and Jenna flew to Napa Valley for their 5th anniversary. I gave them the trip, a wine-tasting package at a vineyard in Sonoma County, 4 nights in a cottage with a view of the hills, the whole thing. Because I am, as it turns out, an extraordinarily generous fool. While they were gone, I hired a woman named Louisa Medina to go over to Owen's house and take care of the yard. Trim the hedges, rake the live oak leaves that Mount Pleasant drops like confetti every fall, clean the gutters. General maintenance. The kind of thing a father does for a son who never quite learned to do it for himself. Louisa was 53, originally from Honduras, built like a fire hydrant, and had the kind of quiet competence that made you feel like the whole world would be fine if she were in charge of it. She'd been doing yard work and odd jobs in the Low Country for 20 years. She did not gossip. She did not complain. She showed up on time with her own tools and left every property looking like a photograph. I trusted her completely. There was one thing I told her. The garden shed at the back of Owen's property. Big thing. Almost the size of a small guest house, sitting under a pair of magnolias at the far end of the yard. Owen had told me months ago not to worry about it. Just old furniture and broken tools, Dad. No reason to go in there. I'd passed that instruction along to Louisa. Don't bother with the shed. Just the yard and the gutters. Louisa called me at 9:47 on a Wednesday morning. I know because I was on my back porch watching Beauregard contemplate a lizard, with the slow intensity of a philosopher considering the meaning of existence. My phone buzzed. I picked it up. Mr. Beaumont. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way you hold a cracked glass, very carefully. I need you to come to your son's house, right now. What's wrong? She paused. One breath. Two. The shed. Mr. Beaumont. It is not old furniture. There is someone living in there. A woman. And there is a baby. I looked at Beauregard. He looked back at me with those ancient, drooping eyes. He didn't move. He didn't need to. He'd been trying to tell me since Thanksgiving. I set my coffee down. I'll be there in 12 minutes, I said. I made it in 9. Louisa was standing at the front gate when I pulled up. She had a pair of hedge clippers in her right hand, holding them the way a woman holds something when she's not entirely sure she won't need to use it on a person. Good instincts. I've always believed you can tell everything you need to know about someone by how they respond to something unexpected. Some people freeze. Some people run. Louisa Medina grabbed the nearest sharp object and stood her ground. I liked her immediately and permanently. She didn't waste words. This way, Mr. Beaumont. I followed her around the side of the house, through the gate to the backyard, past the live oaks dripping Spanish moss, past Jenna's herb garden with its little wooden markers for basil and rosemary, all the way to the far end of the property, where the 2 magnolia trees stood like sentinels, guarding something they were embarrassed about, the shed. I'd seen it a dozen times from the outside. Cedar siding, green roof, a padlock that Owen said stuck sometimes. But standing in front of it now, I noticed things I hadn't before. A window unit air conditioner humming softly on the far side. A cable running from the main house along the fence line, half buried in mulch. The padlock was open, hanging from the latch like a question mark. Beauregard had followed me from the car. He does that. 13 years old, and he still follows me everywhere like I might accidentally find something interesting. But when we reached the shed, he stopped, 4 feet from the door, planted his front paws, and would not move. His ears, those magnificent mournful ears, went flat against his head. He looked at me. He looked at the door. He looked at me again. And then he sat down on the grass and refused to go any further. In 44 years of veterinary medicine, I learned to trust an animal's instincts more than most people's opinions. When a dog won't enter a room, you pay attention. I made a mental note. Then I opened the door. The smell hit me first. Not unpleasant, exactly. Just wrong for what was supposed to be a storage shed. Coffee. Baby powder. The warm, closed-in scent of people living in a small space. I stepped inside and my eyes adjusted to the dim light, and what I saw made me stop breathing for about 3 seconds. It wasn't a shed anymore. Someone had transformed it into a living space. A real one. A queen-sized mattress on a low frame pushed against the far wall, made up neatly with a blue quilt. A mini refrigerator humming in the corner. A microwave on a folding table. A small bathroom had been partitioned off with drywall that still smelled like fresh joint compound. There was a portable crib with a mobile hanging over it. Little wooden stars and moons turning slowly in the air conditioning. Children's books stacked on a shelf. A woman's clothes folded in a plastic bin. A high chair. A box of diapers. The organized, deliberate setup of someone who had been here for a long time and planned to stay longer. She was sitting at the folding table feeding applesauce to a little girl in the high chair. The woman was young, mid-20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of stillness that didn't match the situation. When someone finds out they've been discovered living secretly in another person's property, they usually panic. She didn't. She looked up at me with brown eyes that were already calculating, already adjusting, and she smiled. "You must be Owen's father," she said. "He talks about you all the time. Please, sit down. I'll make coffee." The little girl turned to look at me. She had applesauce on her chin and Owen's jawline. I noticed that immediately, the way a veterinarian notices bone structure without thinking about it. I filed it away and said nothing. I didn't sit. I stood in the doorway of my son's garden shed, which was apparently a small apartment, and I looked at this woman who was smiling at me as if I'd come over for brunch. My name is Vera, she said. And this is Lily. She's 2. I know how old 2 looks, I said. I have grandparent eyes. What I don't have is an explanation for why you're living in my son's shed. The tears arrived right on schedule. Perfectly timed, perfectly calibrated. Her chin trembled first, then her eyes filled. Then one single tear rolled down her left cheek, like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. And maybe it had. She told me the story. She was Owen's remote assistant, had been working for his firm for a year. Her ex-husband was violent, dangerous, had put her in the hospital twice. She'd gotten a restraining order, but he'd violated it, and she was terrified. And she couldn't go to a shelter because he knew all the shelters, and Owen had offered her the shed as a temporary solution. Just until she got back on her feet. Just until the courts handled her ex-husband. Just until. Lily needs stability, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Owen has been so kind. He's the only person who helped us. It was a beautiful performance. In 44 years of veterinary practice, I learned one thing that applies to every species on Earth, including the human one. A truly wounded animal goes quiet. It conserves its energy. It tucks itself into the smallest space it can find, and it breathes and it waits. Only the ones faking it make noise. Vera was making a lot of noise. I smiled. I nodded. I said, "You poor thing." Because the fastest way to understand what's really wrong is to let the patient think you've already accepted the diagnosis. I drove home in silence. Beauregard sat in the passenger seat and stared out the window with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice considering a difficult case. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon at 2 in the afternoon because I had earned it, and I called Cal Braddock. Cal is 68, retired Charleston County Sheriff's detective, now private investigator. He charges fairly, works quietly, and has never once in 20 years told me something I wanted to hear when the truth was something different. I've used him 3 times. I've been right to use him all 3 times. Cal, I said, I need you to find out everything about a woman named Vera. Mid-20s, auburn hair, has a 2-year-old daughter named Lily. She's living in my son's garden shed in Mount Pleasant, and she says she's hiding from an abusive ex-husband. You don't believe her, Cal said. It wasn't a question. I believe my dog, I said. And my dog wouldn't go near her. That evening, Owen called from Napa. His voice had that particular lightness to it, the casual tone of a man working very hard to sound like he wasn't working at all. I recognized it. It was the same voice he'd used at 14 when he put a baseball through the neighbor's back window and stood in my kitchen and said, "Everything's fine, Dad. Nothing happened." Same voice. Same boy. Just taller now. And the windows he was breaking were considerably more expensive. "Hey, Dad, how's everything?" "Quiet," I said. "You know how September is." Yeah. "Hey, listen, did Louisa go by the house? I meant to tell you, you don't really need to send her. I'll handle the yard when we get back." "She went this morning," I said pleasantly. "Trim the hedges. Everything looks good." A pause. I counted. 4 full seconds. "Great," he said. "That's great." "Okay. Well, I'll call you when we land Sunday." I hung up and looked at Beauregard. He was lying on the porch floor with his chin on his paws, watching me the way he watches everything. Patiently. Completely. "You tried to tell me, didn't you, boy?" He sighed. The deep, existential sigh of a very old dog who has seen too much and been thanked too little. I scratched behind his ear and picked up my bourbon and waited for Cal to call me back. I didn't know yet what he'd find, but I had a feeling it would be the kind of thing that changes the way you look at your own son's face. Cal Braddock called me on Friday afternoon. I was on my back porch watching a white egret stand motionless at the edge of my garden pond. It had been there for 20 minutes. A slim gray ghost balanced on one leg, staring into the water with the focused patience of something that understood exactly what it was waiting for and had absolutely no intention of rushing. I respected that bird. I had been studying patience my whole life, and that egret had me beat by a considerable margin. My phone rang. I picked it up without taking my eyes off the bird. "All right, Henry," Cal said, His voice had the particular flatness it gets when he's about to deliver information that nobody is going to enjoy receiving. I've been doing this long enough to recognize the tone. It's the same one I used to use when I had to tell someone their horse wasn't going to make it. "So your girl in the shed," Cal said. "Her name isn't just Vera. It's Vera Novak. 26 years old, born in Somerville. Currently has a mailing address in West Ashley. No ex-husband. Never been married. I ran every domestic violence database in the state. No restraining orders filed by or against her. No police reports. No hospital records consistent with abuse. Nothing. The whole story is fabricated top to bottom." I closed my eyes for a moment. The egret didn't move. "But here's where it gets interesting," Cal continued, and I could hear him turning pages. "Her father is a man named Frank Novak, 61 years old. Used to run a small commercial development company out of North Charleston. And about 3 years ago, Frank Novak entered into a business partnership with an architect named Owen Beaumont." He paused to let that land. It landed. "They were developing a mixed-use property on James Island," Cal said. "Retail on the ground floor, apartments above. Frank put in $120,000 of his own capital. Owen handled the design and the permitting. Except Owen also handled the contractor bids and the accounting, and somewhere in that process, $120,000 of Frank Novak's money disappeared into a series of transfers that ended up in accounts Owen controlled. Frank tried to get it back. Couldn't. Didn't have the resources to hire a forensic accountant or a decent attorney. He lost his investment, lost his company, lost his house." Cal paused again. I listened to the silence the way you listen to a heartbeat through a stethoscope. Counting, measuring, trying to determine if what you're hearing is still functioning the way it's supposed to. "He's in a care facility now," Cal said. "North Charleston, Palmetto Gardens, heart failure. His daughter visits him twice a week. From what I can tell, she's the only one who does." I sat with that for a long time. My son had stolen $120,000 from a man who trusted him. That man was now dying in a facility in North Charleston, and his daughter was living in a garden shed behind the house I'd bought for the person who'd put him there. "There's more," Cal said. And I understood from his voice that the word "more" was doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting. Vera didn't just show up at Owen's door by accident. She planned this. I pulled her phone records, her social media, talked to a couple of people who know her. About 18 months ago, she reached out to Owen through a professional networking site, presented herself as a freelance project coordinator. They started working together. Then they started meeting in person. Then they started meeting in private. He let that sit. Lily is Owen's biological daughter, Henry. The timing lines up perfectly. Vera got pregnant roughly 14 months ago, which is right around when Owen converted that shed into a living space. He's been supporting her financially ever since. I pulled what I could on his banking activity. In the last 14 months, he's transferred approximately $35,000 to an account in Vera's name. The money came from a joint account he holds with his wife. I watched the egret. It still hadn't moved. Patient. Precise. Waiting for exactly the right moment. "One more thing," Cal said. "And this is the part that ties it all together. Vera has retained an attorney. Family law specialist out of Mount Pleasant. I made a few calls. Her lawyer is building a case. Paternity claim, child support, and a civil suit for financial damages related to the fraud against her father. She's not hiding from an abusive husband, Henry. She's building a legal arsenal. The affair, the child, the financial records from the James Island deal. She's been collecting evidence for over a year. Living in that shed wasn't desperation. It was strategy." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The strange thing was, I wasn't surprised by any single piece of it. Not Vera's real identity, not the fraud against Frank Novak, not the affair, not the money. Each revelation clicked into place like a bone sliding back into a joint. The body of this thing had always been there, underneath the skin. Cal had just shown me the X-ray. What did surprise me was the feeling in my chest. It wasn't the hot, sharp anger I'd expected. It was something colder, heavier. The particular weight of realizing that your son is not the man you spent 39 years hoping he would become, and that the distance between who he is and who you raised him to be is a distance you can no longer cross on his behalf. My son was not the victim in this story. He had stolen from a man, wrecked that man's life, and walked away without looking back. But the woman in the shed wasn't entirely the villain either. She had a right to be furious. She had a right to want justice for her father. What she didn't have the right to do was turn her own daughter into a piece of evidence. Lily was 2 years old. She was eating applesauce and playing with wooden blocks, and she had no idea that both of her parents were using her existence as ammunition in a war she hadn't asked to be part of. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, a little girl with Owen's chin and Margaret's eyes was sitting in a converted shed. And nobody in this story was thinking about her first. "Thank you, Cal," I said. "Send me everything. You want me to do anything else?" "No. I've got it from here." I hung up. The egret still hadn't moved. It stood at the edge of my pond, like a gray monk, in the fading afternoon light, perfectly still, perfectly certain, waiting with enormous patience for something worth striking at. I understood that bird completely. Beauregard was lying beside my chair. He lifted his head and placed it on my knee, and I rested my hand on his broad, warm skull, and we sat there together in the cooling September air. "We've got work to do, old boy," I said quietly. He sighed. The deep, knowing sigh of a dog who has been right about something for a very long time and is too dignified to say "I told you so." I called Martin Hale on Thursday morning. Martin is my attorney, 63 years old, Georgetown law, has been handling my affairs for 15 years with the quiet precision of a man who understands that the law is a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He does not panic. He does not speculate. He bills fairly and delivers completely, which is the legal equivalent of a veterinarian who actually tells you the truth about your dog. "Martin," I said, "I need to make some changes to my will, and I need to talk about the Mount Pleasant property. How significant are the changes?" "Owen is coming out." A pause. "Out of the will, entirely?" "Entirely. I also need a trust established for his wife, Jenna, separate from the marriage, protected regardless of what happens next." Martin was quiet for a moment. He knew when to ask and when to wait. This was a waiting moment. I gave him the short version. The shed, Vera, the money, the fraud against Frank Novak, the $25,000 request. I kept it factual because Martin responds to facts the way Beauregard responds to a treat, with full attention and immediate action. "I'll have the paperwork by Friday," he said. "The property notice requires 30 days under South Carolina law. I'll start the clock Monday." "Can I ask what happened, Henry?" "My son stole $120,000 from a dying man, and then asked me for $25,000 more with a lie he didn't even bother making convincing. That's what happened." A long pause. "I'll have everything ready," he said. That evening, I drove to Frank Novak's care facility, Palmetto Gardens in North Charleston, a low brick building with too much fluorescent lighting and the particular smell that all care facilities share, a mixture of disinfectant and cafeteria food, and the quiet patience of people waiting for something they don't want to name. I'd spent 44 years in buildings that smelled like animals in distress. This was worse. This smelled like people who'd stopped fighting. Frank was in room 14. He was smaller than I'd expected, 130 pounds, maybe less, sitting in a wheelchair by the window with a blanket over his legs and an oxygen tube running to his nose. His hands were spotted and thin. His eyes, when he looked up at me, were clear. That was the worst part. His body was failing, but his mind was right there, sharp and present, and fully aware of everything that had been taken from him. "You're Owen's father," he said. Not a question. "I am. He studied me for a long time. I let him. When you've done something to a man through your blood, you owe him the right to look at you for as long as he needs to. Your boy took everything I had," he said finally. His voice was thin but steady. "I trusted him. I put my life savings into that project because he sat across from me in a restaurant and he looked me in the eye and he told me we were going to build something together. And then he took it. All of it. I know, I said. And I'm here because I intend to make it right. He looked at me for another long moment. Then he said something that I will carry with me for whatever years I have left on this earth. Would Margaret have been ashamed of him? I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because the answer was a door I wasn't ready to open in front of a stranger who had every right to watch me walk through it. I pressed my lips together and I looked at my hands and I said, I'm going to fix this, Frank. That's what I came to tell you. He nodded slowly. Then he turned back to the window. I left him sitting there in the late afternoon light, a man who had done nothing wrong except trust the wrong person, and I drove home with my hands tight on the steering wheel and my jaw clamped shut because if I opened my mouth, I was going to say something to the empty car that a 76-year-old man shouldn't have to say about his own son. Wednesday evening, I invited Jenna to dinner. Just the two of us. Owen was working late. Or so he'd told her. I suspected he was at the shed, strategizing with Vera about the money he believed I was going to give him. I almost admired the efficiency. Almost. Jenna arrived in jeans and a linen blouse, still carrying her laptop bag from a deadline she'd been chasing all day. She brought a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc because she is the kind of person who never shows up empty-handed, and I genuinely hated what I was about to do to her evening. I poured us both a glass, and I sat her down at my kitchen table, and I said, Jenna, I need to tell you some things. And I need you to know that I am telling you because I love you. And because you deserve the truth more than you deserve the comfortable version, I told her everything. Vera Novak. The shed. Lily. The fraud against Frank Novak. The $35,000 from the joint account. The $25,000 Owen had asked me for. I showed her Cal's report. I showed her the bank records. I laid it all out the way you lay instruments on a surgical tray. Precise, complete, no detail missing. Jenna didn't cry. She went very still. The way the egret goes still. The way Beauregard goes still. The way everything in nature goes still when it's processing information that changes the shape of the world. How long have you known? She asked. 12 days. And Owen? He asked you for money? 25,000. With a story about a lawyer for an abusive ex-husband who doesn't exist. She set her wineglass down. Precisely. The way you place something when you're making sure your hands don't shake. He told me we were refinancing the kitchen, she said quietly. He asked me to pull 4,000 from my freelance account. I did it without asking questions because I trusted him. She paused. Because that's what you do when you trust someone. The room went very quiet. Beauregard was lying in the corner, watching us both with the solemn attention of a creature who understands grief, even if he can't name it. I told her about the trust, that I'd already arranged it through Martin, that she would be protected, regardless of what she decided about the marriage. She shook her head. Henry, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. You're the only person in this whole mess who didn't deserve any of it. She looked at me for a long moment, and her eyes went wet. Not the performative tears I'd watched Vera produce on command. These were the real thing. The kind that come when you finally understand the exact shape of what you've lost. A marriage she thought she had. A man she thought she knew. A life that had been running on a parallel track behind her back, inside a garden shed at the end of her own yard. I want to be there, she said quietly. When you tell him. I considered that. Saturday, I said. Dinner. My house. She nodded, finished her wine, stood up straight. I'll bring the wine, she said. She left around 8. I washed the glasses. Beauregard came and sat at my feet and leaned his old body against my leg, which is what he does when he knows I need it. She's going to be just fine, boy, I said. More than fine. But Saturday was still 2 days away, and I needed to cook the most important meal of my life. I made shrimp and grits, the real kind, with stone-ground corn from Geechee Boy Mill and fresh shrimp from Shem Creek and andouille sausage, and just enough cream to make Margaret's recipe work the way she intended it to. It was Owen's favorite meal since he was 11 years old. I don't know why I chose it. Maybe because this was the last supper I would cook for my son as a father who still believed the word son meant something that couldn't be broken. The dining table on Trad Street is 140 years old. Heart pine, built by hand, scarred with a century of meals and conversations, and the particular damage that comes from a family actually using their furniture instead of looking at it. I set 2 candles in the center. Margaret's photograph watched from the wall above the sideboard, the one from Folly Beach, where she's laughing with the wind in her hair. I set 3 places. I put Cal's folder and Martin's documents in a neat stack beside my plate, face down, the way you lay cards when you're not ready to show your hand. Beauregard positioned himself under the table with his chin on his paws. He knew. Dogs always know. Jenna arrived at 6. She was wearing a dark blouse and her good earrings, and she carried a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, the same kind she'd brought on Wednesday. She set it on the table and sat down and folded her hands and looked at me and didn't say a word. She was ready. I could see it in the set of her jaw, in the stillness of her shoulders, in the way she'd already decided who she was going to be on the other side of this evening. Owen arrived at 6:30. He was still in his work clothes, khakis, and a blue Oxford rolled at the sleeves, and he walked in with the particular energy of a man who has made a decision about how this night is going to go. He'd chosen confidence. He'd chosen to own the room, to be charming, to walk into his father's house and steer the conversation toward the money and away from everything else. I recognized the strategy because I'd watched him deploy it his entire life. Smile first. Explain later. Apologize never. He walked into the dining room and saw Jenna already seated. He stopped in the doorway. Hey, Jenna, I didn't know you were. Sit down, Owen, I said. Something shifted behind his eyes. A recalculation. He sat. I let the silence hold for a moment. The way you let a good meal rest before you serve it. The candles flickered. Margaret watched from the wall. Beauregard didn't move. Then, I turned over the stack of papers and slid them across the table, one at a time. Cal Braddock's full investigative report. The financial records showing $35,000 in transfers to Vera Novak's account. The property deed for the Mount Pleasant house, with the 30-day termination notice attached. Martin Hale's letter confirming the changes to my will. And the bank statement showing $4,000 withdrawn from Jenna's freelance account, which Owen had told her was for refinancing the kitchen. Owen looked at the papers. He didn't touch them. His hands were flat on the table, the way a man puts his hands when he's trying to keep them from shaking. Dad, he said. His voice was careful, controlled. Let me explain. There is no ex-husband, I said. There is no restraining order. Vera's name is Vera Novak. Her father is Frank Novak, and you know exactly who he is. Because 3 years ago you stole $120,000 from him on the James Island project, and you never looked back. Owen's jaw tightened. That's not what. I went to see him, Owen. I drove to Palmetto Gardens, and I sat in his room, and I looked at a man who weighs 130 pounds and breathes through a tube because his heart is failing, and he looked at me from his wheelchair and he asked me one question. I paused. The room was absolutely silent. He asked me, would Margaret have been ashamed of him? Owen's face lost its color. Not gradually. All at once, like a tide pulling out. His mouth opened and closed and nothing came out, and for the first time in 39 years, my son had no words, no charm, no smooth explanation, no smile to deploy. Just a man sitting at his father's table with the full weight of what he'd done finally landing on his shoulders. I didn't answer Frank, I said. Because the answer would have broken what was left of him, and because it would have broken what was left of me. I let that sit. Then I continued. The property notice is formal. You have 30 days. The house is mine, Owen. It always was. The will has been changed. Martin finalized it this morning. You are no longer a beneficiary. I paused. Jenna is. His head turned toward me. What? I'm establishing a trust for Lily as well. She's your daughter. You will acknowledge her legally. You will provide for her properly. And you will repay Frank Novak every cent of the $120,000 you took from him, because that money was never yours and the man it belongs to is dying in a room that smells like floor cleaner. Dad, you can't just... Owen. I looked at my son. I looked at him, the way you look at something you built with your own hands and watched fail. I can. I built everything in this family. Every dollar, every board, every square foot of the roof over your head. And you used it to steal from a man who trusted you, and then hid the evidence in a garden shed, and then sat across from me and asked me for $25,000 with a story you didn't even respect me enough to make convincing. I let that land. I'm not angry, Owen. I'm done. There's a difference. The room was very quiet. Owen turned to Jenna. She had been sitting perfectly still through all of it, her hands folded, her face composed, her wine untouched. Jenna, he said. His voice cracked for the first time. Please, just let me explain. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry and clear, and absolutely certain. I called a lawyer on Wednesday, she said softly. I'm filing Monday. Owen stared at her, then at me, then back at her. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. I've been sitting here since 6 o'clock, she said, listening to your father explain my own marriage to me. She paused. You told me we were refinancing the kitchen, Owen. I pulled $4,000 out of my savings because you asked me to. And the whole time, you had a woman and a child living in a shed behind our house. Under the table, Beauregard stood up slowly. He looked at Owen the way he'd been looking at Owen since Thanksgiving. Then he turned and walked out of the dining room without looking back. His nails clicked softly on the hardwood floor, growing fainter, and then he was gone. Even the dog had heard enough. I served the shrimp and grits. It was Margaret's recipe, and it was very good. Owen didn't eat. He sat at the table for another 3 minutes in perfect silence, and then he stood up and walked out the front door without saying a word. He didn't slam it. He just pulled it shut behind him, and the soft click of the latch was somehow worse than any slamming could have been. Jenna stayed. She ate her portion slowly and deliberately. She finished her wine. This is really good, she said quietly, looking down at her plate. Margaret's recipe? Margaret's recipe, I said. She nodded. She ate another bite. And in the candlelight, with the empty chair across from her and Margaret watching from the wall, she looked like a woman who had just set down something impossibly heavy and was feeling, for the first time in years, the strange lightness of her own unburdened shoulders. The consequences came the way the white egret strikes. One clean motion. No warning. No second chance. Owen lost the house on the 1st of November. Martin's 30-day notice was precise and inarguable, because Martin understands that the law is most effective when there is nothing left to argue about. Owen hired a lawyer to contest it. The lawyer reviewed the deed, reviewed the notice, reviewed the will, and returned the retainer within a week because there was simply nothing to contest. The property was mine. The will was valid. The decisions were mine. Every board, every nail, every dollar that built that life had come from my hands. And the law, on its better days, respects the people who actually build things. Owen moved into a one-bedroom apartment in West Ashley that I knew cost him more than he could comfortably afford, because West Ashley was the compromise between his pride and his emptied savings. He called me twice in November. I answered both times. I was not cruel. I was not warm. I was precisely what I am. A 76-year-old man who has made his peace with a disappointing chapter and turned the page. Jenna filed for divorce the second week of November. She was efficient about it, the way competent people are when they've already done their grieving before the paperwork begins. She moved out of the Mount Pleasant house before the 30-day notice expired. She took her books, her laptop, her coffee maker, and the bottle of Sauvignon Blanc she'd brought to my dinner table on Trad Street. She left Owen, the good couch, because she is, fundamentally, a kinder person than the situation required her to be. I met Vera one last time. I drove to the shed on a Tuesday morning, and I sat across from her at the folding table where I'd first heard her lies, and I laid out the terms the way I'd once laid out treatment plans for frightened pet owners. Clearly, completely, without room for misunderstanding. I'm establishing a trust for Lily, I said. She will be provided for. Owen will acknowledge paternity legally. He will pay child support. And he will repay your father every cent of the $120,000 he stole, from the sale of assets if necessary. She watched me carefully. What do you want in return? I want you to stop using your daughter as a weapon. Drop the civil suit strategy. Keep the paternity claim. Keep the support. Those are Lily's rights. But the rest of it, the evidence collection, the legal ambush, the plan to weaponize a 2-year-old girl against her own father, that ends today. Vera was quiet for a long time. Lily was on the floor beside us, stacking wooden blocks into a tower and knocking them down with the delighted concentration of someone who has not yet learned that the things you build can be taken from you. Your father deserves justice, Vera, I said. Your daughter deserves better than being a weapon. Those two things don't have to be the same fight. She looked at Lily. Lily looked up at her mother and smiled, and something in Vera's face shifted, not softened. Exactly. She was too hard for that. And honestly, she had earned the right to be hard. But something in her recognized that the little girl on the floor was more important than the war she'd been building. She nodded once. Okay, she said. I drove to Palmetto Gardens that afternoon. Frank was in his wheelchair by the window. The same place, the same blanket, the same thin hands. I sat down beside him and I said, Frank, the money is coming back. All of it. It's going to take some time, but it's coming. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he reached over and took my hand, and we sat there like that, two old men in a room that smelled like floor cleaner and institutional coffee, holding hands and saying nothing, because there are moments in this life when words are just noise, and the only thing that matters is that someone showed up. It is December now. The mornings in Charleston are cool enough to sit on the back porch without sweating through your shirt, and I have been doing exactly that. Coffee with 1 sugar, the way Margaret taught me. Beauregard at my feet, older now, slower, taking longer to get up from his bed in the morning, but still here. God rest Margaret's soul. She would have been proud of that dog. She would have been proud of a lot of things about these last few months, and I carry that thought with me like a stone in my pocket, smooth and heavy and mine. Louisa came by last week. I gave her a holiday bonus and a bottle of Blanton's bourbon because if she hadn't called me on that September Wednesday, this whole thing might have spread into something I couldn't have cut out cleanly. She accepted both with the brisk nod of a woman who doesn't need to be thanked more than once. Jenna came by last Sunday with takeout from a restaurant on King Street. She crab soup, cornbread, and sweet tea. We ate at my kitchen table, and she told me about a new position she'd been offered. Senior editor at a regional magazine based in downtown Charleston. She was considering it. She looked rested. She looked like herself again, which was better than she'd looked in 2 years. You know, she said, stirring her soup, I keep thinking I should be angrier. Are you not? I was. For about 3 weeks, I was furious. And then I just got tired of it. And I thought, what did I actually lose? She tilted her head. A house that wasn't mine, a marriage I was carrying alone, and a man who kept an entire second life in a garden shed at the end of my own yard. She paused. When you put it that way, I agreed. She smiled. It reached her eyes. Thank you for telling me the truth, Henry. You deserved it, I said. You always deserved it. She left around 8. I wash the dishes because I am 76, not dead. And a man who can't wash his own plates has given up on more than just housework. I poured myself a small bourbon and went out to the back porch and stood in the Charleston dark with Beauregard leaning against my leg. Thank God for that dog. Thank God for the truth, even when it cuts. And thank God for the kind of people, the Jennas and the Louisas and the Franks, who remind you that decency is not extinct, just quiet, just waiting in the background, like something patient and strong and unwilling to be the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes I think about what it means to build a life. You lay the foundation. You put up the walls. You fill the rooms with people you love, and meals you cook, and conversations that matter. And sometimes one of those people takes a hammer to the thing you built, and you have to decide whether to rebuild or to let the rubble teach you something. I chose to rebuild. Smaller, quieter, with better locks on the shed. 76 years old. Still standing. Beauregard too, though he takes longer to get up these days. My house is paid for. My conscience is clean. My will is airtight. And somewhere out there in the Charleston night, a white egret is standing perfectly still at the edge of dark water, patient, precise, waiting with enormous certainty for something worth striking at. I understand that bird completely. Don't make me look in my garden shed. If this story found its way to you, if it sat with you, or stirred something, or reminded you of someone you know, I'd be grateful if you'd share it. Leave a thought in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. And if you haven't already, follow along, because the stories we tell here are the ones that matter. The ones about family and truth, and the price of looking the other way. The coffee's on you. The stories are on us.